I would like to welcome you to my channel, That Middle-Aged Lady. My name is Denise, and in today's video, I wanted to give an update to several previous videos I've uploaded that have gone into detail about my journey thus far after being diagnosed with 2 postmenopausal ovarian cysts on my left ovary. It has been a little while since I've done an update, so I felt it was just important to let everybody know where I'm at in that process, assuming that you are familiar with my channel and you've kind of been following my story. So as I go on, I am going to give a quick recap just for those of you who are new to my channel. And if you are, I just want to thank you so much for joining me today. But for those of you who are familiar with me, by all means, feel free to skip forward so you don't have to listen to that recap all over again to the update, once I go into detail about where exactly I'm at in this process today. I am 57 years old. I started to go through menopause right around the age of 48. That is when my periods became less and less frequent. And then by the time I was 51, I was in full-blown menopause, meaning I had not had a period or any type of spotting for 12 consecutive months. I definitely went through the process relatively easily. The main symptom I had were those dreaded hot flashes. But then after I had been postmenopausal for several years, those hot flashes finally went away. And I did do what I was supposed to do. I went in for those annual pap smears. I always, I've always gone in for my annual mammograms and, anything that I need to do just to make sure and keep up with those type of things. And everything always came back good. Everything always came back normal till about 1.5 years ago when I had gone in for my annual pap and vaginal exam. And I got a phone call about a week later that said that it came back slightly abnormal and was labeled atypical squamous cells of undetermined significance, which basically means there was a slight abnormality within the cells that they weren't quite sure what was causing it. So my doctor wanted me to come back in 6 weeks to have that pap repeated, along with a blood test to test for HPV, which is the human papilloma virus, which in a lot of cases can cause abnormal pap to come back. And so in the meantime, as I was waiting for that 6 weeks to be up, I started to experience some pretty intense burning in my vagina, along with a couple different bladder infections. Definitely was a little concerned given the fact that here I had this pap come back abnormal, and now I'm starting to feel this intense burning in my vagina. I was worried it could be cancer. I was worried, that there was something more serious going on. So once I finally got in to see my gynecologist, I definitely made him aware of that. So they repeated the pap, they did the blood test. The blood test came back negative for the human papilloma, but he did diagnose me at that time with a condition called vaginal atrophy. Atrophy meaning thinning. So basically what that means is that your vaginal lining has become thin and it's more susceptible to different conditions that cause this intense burning. I have done several different videos on that alone, so just speaking specifically about the vaginal atrophy. So if that sounds like something you're interested in hearing more about and you haven't, seen those videos yet, I definitely hope that you'll check them out. I tried to give as much information about them that I could. And he ended up putting me on a treatment called Vagifem, which is a small white tablet that comes preloaded into a disposable applicator that you insert into the vagina. And it is supposed to be an ultra low dose of estrogen that then helps to build up that lining a little bit. Not too much, definitely don't want to have too much because that can lead to cancer, but just build it up enough to where you will no longer be feeling the symptoms of vaginal atrophy. And again, I do have several different videos uploaded about that. Vagifem worked wonderfully. It did exactly what it was supposed to do, and the burning went away. I wasn't getting any more of the bladder infection, so I was very pleased with that treatment. But then probably, I think it was like 8 months later, so I had been on the Vagifem for about 8 months, when I started to notice this kind of grayish blackish discharge in my underwear. I was wearing a panty liner during that time just because of when you use that medicine, sometimes it could leak, and so I didn't want it to get in my underwear. So being a white pad, I was able to see that discharge a little bit better, that I might not have been able to see it had it just been in my underwear. It started off grayish blackish, eventually turned to like a light brown discharge. I was concerned because any type of postmenopausal bleeding and or spotting should always be investigated for the possibility of endometrial or uterine cancer. So I did make an appointment with my doctor. While I was waiting to get in to see him, I also started to experience this pain in my lower bottom part of my abdomen that really felt like exactly where my left ovary would be located. I even went to the emergency room at one point because the pain was bothering me so much. They did a CAT scan and said that they didn't see, any type of abnormality. I did make it clear, well, it feels like the pain is on my left ovary, so you're sure you don't see anything? They said no, everything looked fine. I also went in to see my gastroenterologist because they suggested maybe it had something to do with that particular problem, where I had a colonoscopy. I had an upper GI, which is a scope down the throat, and also a HIDA scan, which looks at your gallbladder, because my gastroenterologist was sure that it was related to my gallbladder. All those came back normal. So finally got back in to see my gynecologist. Again, appointments sometimes take forever to get in to see this man. So I let him know about that discharge. He did do a thorough exam, said he did not see or feel anything of concern, but he wanted to do a procedure called a sonohysterogram, which is where they fill the uterus up with a saline solution just so they can get a good look. He was also going to do a biopsy of the endometrial lining, and then he wanted to do a vaginal ultrasound as well. Once I was finally able to get in for those procedures, and once again, everything I'm talking about are separate videos that I've uploaded, since it's kind of gone in, a little bit of a sequence of just everything I've gone through thus far. So if you haven't checked it out, I hope that you'll have a chance to look at it, because I do go into much more detail about these things. But the sonohysterogram came back fine. Uterus looked perfect. Endometrial lining was normal. So in a postmenopausal woman, your endometrial lining, they really want it to be 4 millimeters or lower, which is a good, kind of thickness for it to be. Anything above 4 or even 5 millimeters sometimes can be a little bit more concerning. Mainly because sometimes, not always, so by all means, please don't think I'm saying that, but sometimes a thicker endometrial lining can be indicative of endometrial cancer, so that always needs to be investigated if it is over 4 to 5 millimeters thick. So again, my case, it was 1.9 millimeters, so totally within that, limit that they want it to be. And the biopsy came back normal as well, so everything looked good with the endometrial lining, everything looked good with the uterus. However, I was told that I had a small cyst on my left ovary that measured 6 by 5 by 6 millimeter, so very small. And that would be a little above a half of a centimeter, which, again, I kept telling everybody. I told the ER doctor, I told my gynecologist, I told the gastroenterologist, the pain really feels like it's coming from my left ovary. And all 3 of those doctors told me that they didn't think so. My ovary, according to the CT scan, looked fine. Not sure why that, cyst didn't show up on it. Maybe it was too small. Maybe they didn't think it was significant. But all 3 of them told me, no, I don't think it's, I don't think it has anything to do with your ovary. So although I was happy to finally, figure out what could have been causing that pain, still a little disheartening that I was dismissed as much as I was during that time. It was noted to be a simple cyst at that time, meaning it was fluid filled. It was didn't have irregular edges to it. There was no blood supply going to it. There was no free fluid. So those were all good signs that it was just a simple cyst. But he still wanted to do a CA-125 blood test anyways, which is a cancer marker that sometimes can, if you have an elevated level that's over 35, can be indicative of ovarian cancer. So we went ahead and did that blood test. Mine came back normal. It came back at 14, so definitely under that 35 limit. So he felt comfortable taking the wait and watch approach, where I would just come back in 6 weeks, have the ultrasound repeated again, just to see if it hopefully went away all on its own, stayed the same, or had gotten any bigger. Just a side note, this cyst was on the inside of my ovary, so there are a couple different types of cysts you can get. Well, actually 3 different types. It can be in your ovary, it can be in your fallopian tube, which is the tube that then, brings the egg down to the uterus, or it can be on the outside of your ovary. And again, I've done tons of videos, put out tons of information about all of these different subjects, so I hope that you'll search my channel and perhaps be able to find exactly what you're looking for if you're looking for something more specific. But this particular cyst was noted to be on the inside of my left ovary. So when I went in for that second ultrasound, and it's funny to me, and I'm curious if anybody else has ever experienced this, but different ultrasound techs have different personalities. The first ultrasound tech I had, she was an older woman, probably close to my age, and although she was very nice, she was also very reserved. So she really didn't say a whole lot. When the doctor came in, she was willing to give him the information. But as far as me, like a couple times I said, "Oh, so is that my left ovary?" "Mm-hmm." oh, well, is that my uterus? Yes, it is. Like, didn't want to offer anything more than what she had to, which is fine. I get it. Second ultrasound tech I had was younger. She looked like she was like maybe like late 20s, like 26, 27, maybe 28. She was a lot more talkative. And so at this time, at this particular ultrasound, they had a TV monitor where I was able to see everything she was doing. And I said to her, you know, so is that the cyst on my ovary? And she says, well, that's one of them. And I said, what do you mean one of them? I thought that's all I had. She says, no, you also have another very, very small one. She said that if you were still of menstruating age, we wouldn't even call it a cyst. We would call it a ruptured follicle, which I'm like, okay, well, I'm not going to worry about it then, you know, even though I'm not, you know, having menstrual periods. So why would that be there? So this one, it was my understanding at the time, was on the outside of my ovary. So when I, you know, every time I had the ultrasounds done afterward, I would go in and wait to see my gynecologist. So when he came in, he's like, okay, yep, looks good. Looks like it stayed the same size. And I said, well, what about the second one? And he's like, what are you talking about? There is no second one. So according to the ultrasound tech, so I'm so glad that I asked her these questions because otherwise this might have been missed. I said, according to her, there is a second one that's on the outside of my ovary. And I explained to him how she said if I was menstruating age, it would have been a ruptured, they would have called it a ruptured follicle. So he's like, okay, well, it's not noted on here. He said, let me go back in and look. Came back in about 10 minutes later and he's like, yeah, I guess you have, you know, another something on the outside of your ovary. He said, I'm not sure why it wasn't noted. He said, and then I went back and I looked on your first ultrasound report, looked at the pictures, and he said it was actually on there as well, but again, wasn't noted. And he said, the only thing I can think is because it was so small that they really didn't consider it a cyst. And so that's why they didn't make the notation of it. Asked him if I should be concerned. He said, you know, he didn't see any reason to. Again, there was no free fluid around it, no blood supply going to it. It was, you know, just a simple fluid-filled cyst. But again, you know, because of that, definitely wanted to continue on monitoring me, although he did give me the option at that time of just going ahead and having both of my ovaries removed, just on the off chance that this could turn out to be cancer. Or, you know, down the road, I end up developing cancer since, you know, ovarian cancer is a big deal, obviously. So he told me, you know, gave me some brochure on surgery, said, why don't you go home and think about it and then make up your mind from there. So I told him at the time, I said, you know, why don't we, you know, go ahead and set the surgery up, since I know it can sometimes take a while to do that. In the meantime, I'll think about it. And then when I come back in and have my third ultrasound done, depending on where I'm at with that, is whether or not I will keep that surgery date. He said, that's fine. That's what we agreed to. And my surgery was set up for about a month and a half later. I went home after that particular doctor's appointment and looked up the surgery, since I just wanted to get more information on it. I mean, a pamphlet's great, but it doesn't really tell you everything you want to know. His thought process was that surgery would include removing both the ovaries and both the fallopian tubes, mainly because if, God forbid, this did turn out to be cancer, one of the first places that cancer is going to spread is to either the fallopian tubes or the other ovary. So while he's in there, why not just take it all, eliminate the possibility? That way we don't have to worry down the road that it spread or, you know, whatever. So I agreed with that. I understood that. But obviously, with all surgeries, there comes risks. And I, you know, was concerned about that. And then the other thing that played into it for me is that I have a son who was in 8th grade during that time. This surgery was set for about a week before he was to get out of school. There were going to be some ceremonies taking place, since 8th graders were going to be graduating to be able to go into high school the following year, that I really didn't want to have to miss. And then, as silly as this sounds, I've had a vacation planned for a while now with my kids. I have 4 adult children and then my 14-year-old son for Disney World in August. And I really didn't want to have to miss that because surgery was a lot for me to recover from. So I told myself, when I go back in for this third ultrasound, if both those cysts have stayed the same size, then I was going to go ahead and cancel my surgery date, and then, you know, go in and have another ultrasound done 6 to 8 weeks. And then depending on where I was at with that, go ahead and set surgery up to have it hopefully in September. That way summer would be over, my son would be back in school, I could recover in peace without that mom guilt of here it is summer and I'm, you know, laid up in bed. So that was my decision. So I went back in to have that third ultrasound done, and both cysts were still the same size. I had the one on the inside of my ovary that was about a little over a 1/2 centimeter, and then I had the one on the outside of my ovary that was just under a 1/2 centimeter, and both had stayed the same size. So I talked to my gynecologist about it and said, you know, if I was your mom, if I was your wife, if I was your daughter, your sister, would you be comfortable with me putting off surgery until after summer is over and my son's back in school? He said, given the fact that your CA-125 blood test came back normal, there's no free fluid, there's no blood supply, it is fluid filled, I do feel comfortable with it, and I absolutely see no reason why you shouldn't, you know, be able to put it off. One thing I did forget to mention is on the cyst on the outside of the ovary, it did have a hyperechoic rim to it, which basically means when they were doing the ultrasound, there was a little bit of echo picked up on the outside of that. And according to him, that can be caused from a little bit of blood, that can be caused from a little bit of scar tissue, sometimes even a little bit of air can cause that. It is not said to be cancerous, so he told me that there is really no reason to be concerned. It's just, you know, there. And considering the fact that I was having this discharge, which at that time was starting to go from that light brown back to that grayish blackish again, which is indicative of old blood, I did feel like maybe that was blood around there. And because it's on the outside of my ovary, when I was sitting a certain way or moving a certain way, I really felt like I was irritating it. And perhaps that was what was causing the blood around there. And again, the discharge. He never really got into detail with me about that, even though I did ask about it. So I took it upon myself to believe that that's the only thing that made sense as to what was possibly happening with that. So we did end up canceling that surgery. And he said when I came back in to have my 4th ultrasound done, that if I wanted to have surgery, he could go ahead and put the order in, and then it would fall right in line with about September or October, exactly what I was hoping for. But in the meantime, I noticed that the pain that I was experiencing was definitely starting to get worse. In my mind, it felt like the cyst was maybe getting bigger. And then that grayish blackish discharge was also getting worse as well. It wasn't like a constant thing, like I might have a couple of days where it was very noticeable, and then maybe 2 days later, it was just a little noticeable, and it kind of fluctuated between being, you know, kind of a lot to being only a little. But the pain remained. Like I feel the pain from this cyst every single day of my life. It's not consistent all throughout the day, but if I've, again, done a lot that day or, you know, moved around a lot that day, the pain definitely seems to be worse. So I knew that something wasn't right. I knew that, you know, either the cyst got bigger or it was bleeding more or I was irritating it more. So I kind of prepared myself for that. Recently, this is why I'm doing the update. And again, for those of you who are already familiar with my channel, I'm so sorry to have to recap all this again, but when I went back, I just recently went back in for that 4th ultrasound, and this time I had an ultrasound tech who, for whatever reason, they stopped doing the monitor, maybe because people like me are a little bit too nosy and ask way too many questions, but no monitor this time. And I said to her, because I knew, again, I knew something changed. I knew from the pain I was feeling and the amount of discharge that something had changed. So I said, so are the cysts the same size? And she stops and she looks at me, and she looked probably about 30. And she said, you seeing the doctor after you're done here? And I said, yes, I am. She goes, ask him. I'm like, you can't tell me? She said, no, ask him. I'm like, okay, that's fine. You know, I can see who you are. So I, you know, didn't push it any further. And then once my doctor finally came in, I heard him in the hallway say, was her CA-125 blood test normal? Apparently that's a big thing, you know, when looking at this. And they said yes. So he comes in, sits down. He says, all right, let's see where we're at now. He says, it got bigger. And I'm thinking, okay, I knew it. And I said, well, how much bigger? He said last time it was, and this is the one on the outside of the ovary, the one with a hyperechoic rim. He said last time it was 5 by 6 by 5. He said now it's 9 millimeters. So really about 4 millimeters bigger, which to me is pretty significant. So right now it's falling under just 1 centimeter. And so in a postmenopausal woman, any cyst that is about 5 centimeters or less, especially if it is considered to be a simple cyst that is round in nature, doesn't have any, you know, jagged edges or any irregularity to it, doesn't have any blood supply, doesn't have any free fluid, and is not solid, it has no solid components to it. So in other words, it is just a fluid-filled cyst. Anything under 5 to 4 centimeters usually is not worrisome, and they don't, you know, they would expect you to have a follow-up just to make sure that it doesn't get bigger and to kind of monitor it, but normally they don't worry about that being cancer. And so the fact that it was just under 1 centimeter was still a good, I mean, it wasn't a horrible thing. Yes, it had grown by 4 millimeters, which concerned me, but the fact that it was still under 1 centimeter was a good thing. And I said, okay. I said, well, then let's go ahead and set that surgery date back up, because, you know, now with the time that we're at, hopefully September, October. He says, oh yeah, it won't definitely be any earlier than that. And I'm like, okay, perfect. My son will be back in school. Again, I asked him, you know, I said, should I be worried over the fact that it's grown? And he said, no. He said, because there's no free fluid. Your CA-125 blood test is good. He said, this is benign. He said, it's benign, which confuses me because I feel like he changes his mind a lot. One minute he's saying it's benign. The next minute he's saying, you know, we just have to make sure and send out the biopsy to make sure it's not cancerous. You know, so I kind of get like, I feel like I get kind of conflicting things from him, just like the size. Like in the beginning, when the cyst on the outside of my ovary, I was told that it was, you know, very small, like so small that they probably wouldn't even call it a cyst. And yet technically it was only 1 millimeter smaller than the one on the inside of my ovary. So sometimes I feel like I get conflicting answers. I realize there's a lot of hands in the pot in this, you know, there's a lot of different ultrasound techs. And like he said, you know, he said, you know what, let me go look at the ultrasound itself. He said, because I'm curious. And he came back in and sits down and he was like, I don't know. And I said, what do you mean? He said, I don't know. And he said to me, it really didn't look any different from the last one. He said, sometimes an ultrasound tech might, you know, the wand that they insert into the vagina, he said it might be a different angle. They might move it a different way. He said, I'm not solely convinced that it really did grow that much, to be honest with you. So that's a little, you know, frustrating, because I feel like every time I go in, it's different answers. And the other thing that frustrates me is that, you know, after the second ultrasound, and I wanted to, you know, write all the facts down so that I could go and research it. I wanted to know what size my ovaries were. I wanted to know what size my uterus was, what size the thickness of the endometrial lining, kind of person I am, that I like to research everything, because that way I can go into the doctor's office and I can have the questions that I want to ask, and I can feel informed, and I can feel like I'm doing everything I can to educate myself so that I can make educated decisions. And so when I you know, they have where you can go in and have your chart. It's like a health chart thing. But when I went in, there was no information on there. So I called and asked to speak to somebody about that, and said I was just looking to get, you know, this certain information. We'll look at your health chart. Well, I did. There's nothing in there. Okay, well, then you must not have been looking right. Okay, well, can you tell me, I mean, you know, sometimes the way that people treat you, I don't like it. You know, this is my health, this is my body, this is everything going on with me. And it would be nice if you could walk me through it if, you know, something isn't showing up. So I explained to her, I said, okay, look, I'm looking at it right now. I said, and I'm telling you right now, there's nothing on here. She goes, well, did you look under messages? Why would I look under messages? I looked under health summary. I looked under health chart. Why would I look under messages? Because that's where it is. Okay, so I looked under messages, and sure enough, that's where it was. But how would I know that unless somebody told me? So that's a little bit frustrating as well. That I think the way that you can get treated sometimes, when, you know, it's like they want to get mad at you because you want to be involved in your health, but yet they want to get mad at you if you don't know any answers to anything either. Like if you go in with too many questions. So I don't know, sometimes I think you're darned if you do and you're darned if you don't. So basically where I am at in this process today is that, you know, it could be 9 millimeter, according to him, it could not. But again, the pain that I'm experiencing definitely is worse. The discharge is worse. So I have to believe that, you know, I don't know if it's because I'm just the way I'm, and with it being on the outside of my ovary and I'm moving around a lot, if maybe I'm just irritating it and that's what's causing this. I don't have an answer, and he really didn't have a whole lot to say about that, but that's my personal opinion. I am currently waiting for the doctor's office to call me and give me that surgery date. Hopefully it will be September or October, hopefully no later than that. But that is basically where I'm at in the process. He still does not believe that it's cancerous. He still seems to be under the impression that it's benign. I'm not sure why it's growing. He didn't give me an answer as to that. So I do go back at the end of August to go ahead and have another ultrasound done. He said before surgery he does want another ultrasound just to know what he's up against. And I asked him, what happens if you get in there and it looks cancerous? He said, then I sew you back up and I refer you to an oncologist who will then be able to take the proper steps to, when they remove the ovary, to make sure that they're not spreading any type of cancer around. So basically that's where I'm at. I am ready to have the surgery. There's sometimes I think that I wish I would have just gotten it done, because now I probably would have been to the point of being recovered. The ovaries would have been out, you know, I could have moved on. But at the same time, you know, I also think I'll be able to recover a lot more in peace once my son's back in school again. I won't feel as guilty for him just sitting around during summer vacation with mom upstairs, you know, resting. So I'm just going to have to wait, and hopefully it won't get any even bigger by then. If so, then obviously something's going on with it. But that's basically where I'm at. And again, I have got a lot of different videos uploaded on each of these subjects because I go into more detail, I give more information, I try and answer as many questions that I possibly can that I think, another woman might be wondering for herself, because sometimes it is hard to get those answers through your doctor. So I hope you're, able to check out each of those videos. And if you have any questions or comments, I always ask, please feel free to leave them, and I will be happy to answer anything that I can. I will definitely be back once I have that 5th ultrasound done, and once I know the surgery date. And then as I have that surgery, I most definitely will document every step of the way for any other postmenopausal woman who also, not even postmenopausal, I guess any woman in general who's going to be having her ovaries out. But I do think that there is a different kind of risk when it comes to a postmenopausal woman. Obviously, cancer risks go up in postmenopausal women for ovarian cancer. So I guess that's my biggest fear, is that when he opens me up, he is going to realize that maybe something more sinister is going on. But at the same time, I also feel like, then why wouldn't the CA-125 blood test have been higher than what it was? And why wouldn't the ultrasound have picked something up, whether it's blood supply, solid component, free fluid, something. So I can't say what caused this, but I've always told everybody, if there's something weird to be had, then I'm the person to get it. I have cysts in my breasts. I have a large cyst on my liver. I feel like maybe that's just, how my body is. I'm not going to worry about it, but just wanted to make sure and give this update since it's been a little while and let everybody know where I'm at in the process. So I just want to thank you so much for joining me, sticking with me, hearing my story as I go along. And if you are somebody who is also going through something similar, I would love for you to leave a comment, not only for me, but to share with the other viewers as well. As I've always said, us postmenopausal women need to, stick together and help each other through this process. So other than that, I will look forward to being back next time, and just want to thank everybody again.